We are live. Welcome. Welcome back. I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about how we talk about climate change, which I don't actually talk about. I talk about global heating because that's the physics behind all of this stuff. I like to talk about physics, not narrative warfare. But anyway, it's called climate change, so we'll go with that. A couple days ago, one of my favorite YouTube influencers, a German physicist named Sabine Hossenfelder, a woman. She does most of her videos on she's a science communicator, mostly in physics. She does a lot of her videos on what's happening in physics, so more like news, right? But she also does meta-analysis of how we do physics, not how we communicate about it so much. Although she can be fairly critical of certain articles that are written that she thinks are poorly written or contain bad information. But she steps back from the actual work and looks at how we do the work and how we talk about the work. So that's really cool. I like that. I like meta-analysis, and she's very good at it. She's very, very clever and very funny. I actually recommend you check out her channel and probably subscribe, because if you're interested in any of the stuff I'm talking about, you'll probably find some of her stuff really interesting, and she's very entertaining. I'll give her full points for that. Oops, I forgot my microphone. Sorry. There we go. So I linked her video, the one I'm referencing here. I linked her video in the description, and like I said, go check her out and drop her a like and a subscribe, and you'll probably like her stuff. So what she was talking about a couple days ago was her basic mistrust of science, which is kind of strange coming from a working physicist. But it's not really out of character, because she wrote a book called, and all of this is relevant to climate change, because and how we talk about it, and even how we do the research, because I lament all the time that we're really going down a very bad and very dangerous path, and she agrees. So she wrote a book called Lost in the Math, where she criticizes physicists for just not doing physics. Instead, they're just doing math. And she's right. There's a lot of physics now that's being done in the world with really expensive equipment and very expensive experiments that are trying to verify predictions made first in math. Now, there's nothing terribly wrong with that. Generally, what happens with science is we start with observations. And from observations, we try to find patterns that suggest that there's a background behind the patterns that are giving us the observations. So you start with observations, and you kind of have some ideas about, why is this happening? How are these observations linked together? They seem similar. And then you come up with background processes. So, apple falls, pear falls, a chicken falls. What's going on? Gravity. What's gravity? Why do all these things fall? And they all fall in the same way. They don't fall sideways. They don't fall up. They fall down. What is that? Again, it's gravity. And then from observations, you say, well, maybe there's this thing. And then you go looking for the thing, right? Because you have some suggestion that the thing is there. And that's how science is generally done. Until recently. And recently, like maybe in the last 20 years, a lot of physics is not based on observations. It is based literally on people sitting around thinking about how might the world work, and do I have some math might describe that? Okay, now I have some math, I have some ideas, but it's all coming from math. And then you go out and you try and verify if what you came up with is true. And that's weird. I mean, maybe that's how we have to do physics now, because physics has become so rarefied and so esoteric that there really aren't any observations. What do we know about protons? What do we know about neutrons? What do we really know about electrons and time and space and all these things? Although even Einstein based his stuff on observations made by other people, and he came along and he formulated his general and special theories of relativity, but it was based on observations, right? And then it became math, and then we verified the math, but the math was based on observations. He was trying to explain something that was observed over here by people who had been making observations for hundreds of years ahead of him, and even Isaac Newton. And it just wasn't at some point. The observations didn't work with new observations. There was a disconnect. And what was the disconnect? And then he came up with math. But that's a natural progression. If you start with the math, then you can get lost in the math. And that was her book, Lost in Math. So getting back to the topic at hand, I'm sorry I got so spun out there, but actually I'm interested in the topic, obviously. So what she was saying, and the title is a little bit provocative. I can't remember what it is now, but I read the title of her YouTube video. I was like, oh, come on, Sabina, where are you going with this, girl? So, but I listened to it, and I understand her background. She's suspicious of science nouveau, right? Of how people are doing science. But climate science tends to be based in observations. So lost in the math, how does that apply to climate science? So I listened to the thing. And if you were if you were part of the denial-sphere, if you're a big time denier, then you might say, yeah, she's right. The climate scientists can't be trusted. They're liars and frauds, and they're in it for the money and conspiracy and chemtrails and all this stuff. But if you just let her explain her thought process, you get halfway through it, and then she says, okay, so here's what I think is going on with climate science and why it's hard to trust climate scientists. And it has nothing to do with the money and the conspiracy and the tinfoil hats and all this kind of stuff. It's because climate scientists are afraid. They're afraid. So what are they afraid of? Well, I mean, I've been a scientist for a long time. And I understand that, okay, all the early science that was done, like before 1950, when the government started getting involved, mostly for warfare purposes, right? Atomic bombs, right? And jets and explosives, and the governments got big into science. It used to be the governments were big into making cannons and guns and airplanes, and that's more like physics. That's just like, how do we make this thing fly? How do we make ships? How much metal do we have to put into a ship? And how do we weld it together? Where do the rivets go? And architecture and ship making, and that was not really science, right? It's engineering. How do you make a ship? We've been making ships for 10,000 years. How do we make the ship out of iron? So there was engineering questions, but then later the governments got into science. Now, why did the governments get into science? Because of the atomic bomb. So if you wanted to be a scientist after a while, you were probably not some independent guy with a tenure at a university who's been tinkering around with radiation or molecules or DNA or whatever, and you just kind of doing it on the side and publishing these papers that nobody reads. Probably you're working for the government now, because the government got big into science, and so the government was all like, wow, we need science. And we got the atomic bomb, and then the Soviets got the atomic bomb, and then they put Sputnik up, and then we had a rocket engineer from Germany, and we're going to go to the moon, and we're going to do it for the thrills, and then we have to do these other things, and it's all science, right? Everyone's doing science now. And now the government is doing science, real science. How to get to the moon. Not something we've been doing for 10,000 years, and now we want to do it differently. Never been to the moon. Don't know what's up there. Don't know why we'd want to go. It's science. It's just pure science. So the government got into science. And when the government got into science, well, pretty soon, there was all this mad need for scientists. And all these scientists came out of all these universities. And that was one of the reasons why the government paid returning veterans, war veterans, money to go to college, because they wanted engineers. They wanted scientists. They wanted people who could work in these new industries. They were being spun up to fight communism, right? And spinning up industries for the Third World War, because I thought that was coming. They really did. So they wanted to get ahead of it. And the Third World War was going to be a science war. Atomic weapons, right? Biological weapons, computers, code breaking, all the stuff. The internet was a government project. computer science, right? Networking science. How do we communicate? How do we move bits and bytes around? How do we secure all this stuff? It was just basic research. And so the government poured all this money into science, and all these people rushed into universities. They got all these grants from the government. They got all these grants from corporations who were getting grants from the government. And all this stuff was happening, and everybody became a scientist. It was all about science. And it was all funded by the government. And then along came, uh, you know, the problem with tobacco. And the tobacco industry didn't like the government accusing them of causing lung cancer. So the tobacco industry started denigrating science. Science. Because how do we know about lung cancer? Science. Medical science, but it doesn't matter. Oh, it's more, it's cell science, how do cells mutate, and what is genetic mutation? What causes cancer? It's all science. So the tobacco industry started saying, instead of science is great, like we were saying in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, the tobacco company started saying, oh, science, that's bullshit. These people, look at them. Just look at them. They're bald. They wear thick glasses. I mean, they sound geeky. They're not real men. Well, scientists, you're going to listen to these people? Shouldn't you be listening to, real men with manly men things? Who do manly things, and they don't just sit at a chalkboard writing squirrely little letters and doing science and shit. So they cast doubt on science. And then when the fossil fuel industries started doing their own science and reviewing science that had been done 150 years before, and they started to realize that their product was going to be a problem, they were right. They knew. Of course, they wanted to know. They did the science themselves because they wanted to know, is our product going to become a liability? Are we going to have to fight something to keep our businesses going? And the answer was yes, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. You're in trouble. So they did their own science, and then they took a page right out of the tobacco industry. And there's a whole book on this by Naomi Oreskes or one of those other ones, Merchants of Doubt, right? And what's in doubt here is the veracity of science. And so all these conspiracies about climate science. And pretty soon the climate scientists are just like the people studying tobacco-related lung cancers. It's like, well, what's your agenda? Of course you're going to find a problem with the climate because that's your bread and butter. Of course you want more grant money, whatever. We know what you're doing. This is just a living for you. You're just making a living. You're just selling fear. And so of course you're going to say there's a climate problem. Now, who's going to argue with that? No one even knows what the climate is. You're just saying there's a climate problem. I don't see a climate problem. I see, spring, summer, winter, fall, and all that, and I don't see a climate problem. And so they just sowed fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and they went after the science. And so, and I pointed this out too. Climate scientists are afraid. Climate scientists are afraid. They're afraid. They're afraid. Personally, they're afraid. Individually, they get no backing from their universities and administrations. If they work for the government, they're harassed and threatened. Don't publish that. Let the lawyers look at your science data before you publish anything. And then, of course, the world, starting with the UN, created this whole IPCC process, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the whole point of that turns out to be, who knew, but turns out to be, now that we see what they're doing, is they're taking all the climate science, and then there's lots of articles published every year on climate science. They're taking all the climate science and they're interpreting it for the public. Of course they are. Of course they're interpreting it for the public. And there's a lot of good science that just ends up on the cutting room floor. It just gets shit canned. They can't really shit can it. They can't take it off the internet. They can't take it out of the repositories. They can't unpublish it, but they just shit can it. They just say, look, don't read all those articles. There's 8,000 of them. Why? Who cares? Just read our 3-paragraph summary of, 7 years of work, 8,000 articles, 7 years of work, people who have, the knowledge and the special skills to study this stuff, and all this data and all of this analysis and all these presentations and all these conferences and all these PhD students and all this work that gets done over 7 years, because that's about how often they do an IPCC process report. And we'll summarize it down to 3 paragraphs for you, and that's what you're going to read. And those 3 paragraphs, every word, every single word, every comma is negotiated by lawyers for the governments. Every comma, every period, every word, every single part of those 3 paragraphs is negotiated. And it ends up saying things that are not false, but which are also not useful, because they don't want to be useful. They want to put a lid on this whole thing. And that's not conspiracy. There's lots of climate scientists that come out after every IPCC report, lots of them, hundreds of them. And they say, this is absolute barking madness. This is bullshit. They took 7 years of work and 8,000 papers, and they read them all and they summarized them. And then there's 3 paragraphs in the executive summary for policymakers. And it says, yeah, no problems. And then, if you're a climate scientist who comes out and says, excuse me, there's a problem here. I do this work. I'm in the field. I'm on the Greenland ice sheet. I am in the Antarctica. I am measuring the glacial flows. I am measuring the sea level rise. We're looking at the AMOC. We're looking at the Pacific Gyre. We're looking at the ocean temperature anomalies. We're looking at the changes in the weather patterns. We're looking at the incidence and repeatability of record heat waves. And we're looking at this stuff. And then in your 3-paragraph summary at the last IPCC report, you say, got no problems. Really? Beg to differ. But look what happens. If the governments are saying there's not a problem, it is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Intergovernmental, not international. Intergovernmental. It's theirs. It's their whole process. We've had 7 of them now. They ramrod the whole thing. So if you're a climate scientist and you're probably working for the government, or you're working for a university who got government money, well, then if you can't really bitch and complain that they are destroying the veracity of your work. And the reason you're doing this work is to try and understand what's happening in the planet, so that, I don't know, maybe we could get some advanced warning that there's a real serious fucking problem coming. Wouldn't that be nice to have some warning? I'd like to have some warning. Wouldn't you like to have some warning? Well, where are you going to get that? You're going to get the warning from politicians? You think the politicians are going to, how about the tobacco companies? Are they going to warn you? How about the fossil fuel industry, the energy sector? Are they going to warn you that there's a problem coming? No, they're not. They knew in the 60s. They knew exactly what was happening. And their whole fiduciary responsibility for themselves and their shareholders was to make sure that no one thought there was a problem. Because how can you sell product into a problem space? When your product is the problem. And it is. And maybe you don't believe that, but go watch another video, because that's the reality. Their product is the problem, and your consumption of their product is the problem. So, I know you can't survive without fossil fuels. I certainly can't, but I think we should know that that's a problem. Because if we know it's a problem, maybe we can do something about it. Maybe we can find some other way to live. Wouldn't that be nice? You want to live, right? I do. And if fossil fuels is, killing us, then maybe we should find another way to exist that doesn't kill all of us. That'd be nice. I think. Maybe I'm just weird that way. But anyway, so Sabine, she's saying she doesn't trust climate scientists. And I'm like, girl, okay, I'll watch this. And so I'm watching it. She finally gets to the point where she says, look, these people are afraid. They're afraid. They're being marginalized. They're being shoved to the side. And anytime one of them sticks their head up, they get hammered down. And they're getting sued. They're losing their jobs. They're losing their grants. They get blackballed, and they can't get another grant. And these people, they've spent their whole life studying these things, and this is now their livelihood. Yeah, okay, so they're making money studying climate change. So what? People make money studying cancer. Of course, we never cured cancer. And you could say, well, yeah, that's an example of how people get a vested interest in, not solving a problem. But the climate scientists are just doing their research, right? And they're just saying, look, this is what's happening. The glaciers are melting. The sea level is increasing. The AMOC is shutting down. The ice is melting at the North Pole. Oh, it's also melting at the South Pole. And this is how much sea level we're going to rise. We're going to have if a significant part of the Greenland ice sheet melts. And here's another bit of sea level rise we're going to get from the Thwaites Glacier collapsing. And here's some other things. And here's the ocean temperature anomaly. And we'll talk about the bleaching of the coral reefs. But hey, let's talk about a failure of the ocean ecosystem. How about that? That's another implementation of the same problem. And they're just saying these things. And they're afraid, they're afraid that if they push it too hard, they're going to lose their funding. And they're going to lose their jobs, and they're going to not be able to have a job. And then they'll have this PhD in whatever Earth system dynamics, and and they can't even use it in the industry because they've been blackballed. No one will hire them. They end up being a weatherman on some stupid podunk channel someplace. And once in a while, as a weatherman, they slip in some little tidbit about climate change because they've got a PhD in the subject, right? Oh yeah, and well, while we're looking at the coming hurricane, let's look at this warm water mass in the Gulf of Mexico. Oh, and where that comes from? That comes from global heating. Or so the rumor is. What do I know? I'm just a weatherman. Actually, I've got a PhD in Earth system dynamics, but I'm not allowed to say that online because they're just paying me as a weatherman because I said something, in a paper, and I got blackballed by my industry. Now I don't have a job except as a weatherman. So they're afraid. And what she accused climate scientists of being is afraid. And this, and then of course you have to say, well, yeah, I guess. Sure, you're afraid. You've touched the third rail of capitalism, fossil fuels. You're going to go after fossil fuels, really? Except they don't, of course. What they do is they talk about, well, let's reduce emissions. How's that for a start? Let's reduce emissions by, I don't know, half in 60 years. Let's reduce emissions by half in 60 years. And you'll think, wow, that sounds like going after fossil fuels. It's not. The fossil fuel industry will even say that. Reducing emissions? Absolutely. We're all about reducing emissions. You do that. You figure that out. Reducing emissions. We're all about that. We'll leave it. We're so into reducing emissions that we will even fund grants and looking into ways to reduce emissions. And money will flow into reducing emissions. And then the first one of you reducing emissions people, whoever ever goes so far as to mention, well, we could reduce emissions if we just left fossil fuels in the ground. That will get your head cut off. Okay, so we're going to bring them into the system, and we're going to teach them the hard way not to ever talk about leaving fossil fuels in the ground, although that would reduce emissions and with immediate effect. Well, let's not have that conversation. Instead, let's just focus on reducing emissions. I'm giving you money to study how to reduce emissions. That's what you're going to do. You're going to reduce emissions. You're going to find a way to reduce emissions so that we reduce emissions, so that emissions are reduced. And reducing emissions and having emissions reductions is key. That's absolutely key to managing global heating and climate change, is reducing emissions. And this is critical. We don't talk about anything else, just reducing emissions. And what can you do to reduce emissions? And what does it mean to reduce emissions? And who's going to reduce emissions? And how fast? And who's going to pay for that? And we're reducing emissions now. And here's money. We'll pay for a grant, and we'll get you a PhD, and we'll fund a chair at a university for reducing emissions, because we're reducing emissions, right? You're on board with that, right? About reducing emissions? And you're not going to mention anything about leaving fossil fuels in the ground, right? Are we clear on that? You're just reducing emissions. Can you just do that? Can you focus on that? Yeah, I know the way to reduce emissions is actually to leave fossil fuels in the ground, but let's not. Okay, let's not do that. Leave fossil fuels in the ground. Let's get the fossil fuels out of the ground in a way that reduces emissions. Let's refine them into gasoline and diesel and other products and plastics in a way that reduces emissions. Let's get them out there in industry and in the consumer space so people can have them in a way that reduces emissions. And when the things are consumed, we'll reduce emissions at the point of consumption. And we're just going to reduce emissions. We're going to pump. We're going to transport, we're going to refine, we're going to transport again, we're going to sell, we're going to burn, we're going to profit, and we're just going to reduce emissions at every stage in the game. Just reducing emissions, whatever that means. And everyone will be saying, yeah, well, that's it. We need to reduce emissions, just like you just described. At every single point, they got you. They got you. They didn't get me because I understand what our problem is. But they got you, and they got all these climate scientists who are now reducing emissions, and they're dependent on that funding. And they're afraid to do anything else. And they're not going to come out and say, well, once in a while they do come out and say, and I'm always like, he's not going to say it. He's not going to say it. He just said he's going to reduce emissions. He's not going to say we have to leave fossil fuels in the ground. He's all about reducing emissions. He's not going to tell you what that means because you don't know what that means. You don't know what that means. You actually don't know what that means. You don't. I could tell you it doesn't mean anything. And that's why you don't know what it means. You don't know what it means because you're dumb. You don't know what it means to reduce emissions because it doesn't mean anything. Look it up. Talk to somebody who understands what the topic is. I do. I'm telling you, it's meaningless. So, everyone's reducing emissions. And they'll give you funding for that. And you'll take the funding because you got a house payment. You got a mortgage. You got a kid, saving up money to go to college. You're living in a suburb and you're paying $5 a gallon for gasoline, just like all those other chimps out there, right? And you're just hoping the supply never gets cut off and you've got your PhD and you got funding to reduce emissions, and baby, that's keeping the wheels from coming off. And she says, that doesn't cut it. And I'm saying right now, that doesn't cut it. I understand you're afraid. And we're all doomed as a consequence. We're all doomed. Now, I've said many times that we will eventually cut emissions. We will eventually. Watch this. Watch what I'm about to do here. Despite the fossil fuel industries, despite the government interference, despite the energy sector, despite the automobile industry, and despite all the infrastructure people who make roads and bridges and overpasses and airports and airlines and all this stuff, despite them and all their best effort and all of their subterfuge and all of their bribery and all of their threats and all their lawsuits and all their IPCC reports and everything else, despite everything they have, everything they've done, everything they're going to do, all the money they're going to throw at this, all the lies, all the subterfuge, all the misdirection, all of it, despite all that, despite 100 years of nothing but just flat out, just fisting people off with lies. Despite that, just despite 100 solid years of winning every turn, every angle, every attempt, every shot across the bow, winning every single time, forever. Despite all that, we're going to leave fossil fuels in the ground. There you go. We are going to leave fossil fuels in the ground. Not because we want to, but because of physics. That's how it works, folks. That's how this works. That's how it works. It doesn't work another way. That's how it works. We are destroying the planet for our uses. It's still going to be there. There's going to be a piece of rock, and there's going to be some lava, and there's going to be an ocean. There's going to be, rain here, and there's going to be heat waves, and there's going to be, scarab beetles and scorpions scurrying around. But we're not going to be doing anything because we're going to be fucked. Some point real soon now, real soon, you're going to understand what that means. Right now, you have no idea what that means. I know what it means. I have seen it, baby. I have seen the light. And we are fucked. And you know what happens when you're fucked? The number of things you can do, the open horizons, the vistas of all the possibilities collapses down to survival, food, clothing, and shelter. You got your first class ticket to the Titanic. You're going to New York City. You're going to start your life over. You've got some money here, and you've got your invention over there, and you're going to sell this to Wall Street, and you're going to make money. And then all this stuff is going, and it's all perfect. And then what? We hit an iceberg? Are you even serious? Yeah, really. Yes, we've hit the iceberg. Modernity, global industrialized civilization, all this complexity, all this gearing, it's hit the iceberg. We've hit the iceberg. Well, la-di-da. Now what? Well, if you're on the Titanic, you're heading for the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. Enjoy the ride, I guess, because that's where you're headed. You're sinking. And in our case, we're going down. That's it. We've hit the iceberg. The equivalent thereof, it's called global heating. We've hit the iceberg. It only gets worse from here. Just as the Titanic, the tilting of the deck only got worse with every passing minute. It just got worse and worse and worse. And you're like, isn't this thing ever going to level out? No, no, it never leveled out. It didn't level out until it hit the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. and then it was level on the bottom of the sea. Okay. And we are in the tilting phase, and people are saying, well, we can still fight this. What? Yeah. We got this. We can innovate. We can make discoveries. We can fund mitigation research. We can do shit. And I'm like, what? You hit a fucking iceberg. Get off of this fucking boat, okay? No. I see that. I'm making an observation. The deck is tilting, but I think the tilt has decreased. I think the tilt can be managed. I think maybe we could flood the other end of the boat and right the boat. We can do something. Another boat can come along and lift the front of the boat out of the water. Things can happen, and we can figure this out. Engineering, innovation, of funding the right kinds of projects, and we can pull this out. We can save this boat. I'm like, you're crazy, right? I mean, you've lost your mind, right? I mean, okay, that's fine. Grief, right? You can't face it. It takes a strong mind to face your own mortality. It really does. You have to be really strong to say, okay, well, this is bad, and this is really bad, and I guess I'm done. We're done. Unless we can get off of this boat and find some other way to float. I think that's called a lifeboat. Are there lifeboats on the Titanic? Can I get one? Where are the lifeboats? Someone help me with the lifeboat. Okay, maybe that'll work, but that's getting off. That's getting off the Titanic, getting on a lifeboat. But that's because the Titanic hit an iceberg, and there was no way to innovate. There's nothing to invent. There was no Deus ex machina to pull this shit out of the dumpster, right? That's where we're at. We hit the iceberg. We kept burning fossil fuels. 70 years ago, we could have stopped and maybe it would have made a difference. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, surely things wouldn't be as bad as they are now if we'd stopped 70 years ago. Surely. I mean, I can only hope so. But, look what happened. We didn't. We didn't do it. Well, la-di-da, we didn't do it. So now here we are 70 years later. We hit the iceberg, and it's been 70 years equivalent. And the decks are starting to tilt, and now people are wondering, wait, is this ship sinking? It's been 70 years since we really discovered, more like 150 years, but 70 years since we discovered climate change and global heating. And, it's not getting better. Oh, actually, it's in the last 20 years, it's gotten a lot worse. Oh, it's getting worse faster. And the things that we thought would take hundreds of years to happen, that's what I heard when I was in school. It's going to take hundreds of years for any of this stuff to come to haunt us. Things we thought would take hundreds of years to come to haunt us. Oh my God, it's only been 20 years and they're here. And they're all happening. Ermagerd, who would have thought? Well, okay, so we were dumb. We were stupid. We were chimps. We didn't understand. Well, why would we understand? It's the Earth dynamic system. We barely had enough computational power to run the Earth 3 model, right? The limits to growth. And that was the thing, actually. They had that. They did have that. But that was limits to growth, right? This is something slightly different. This is Earth dynamic system science. And we don't have much of that even now. And look what we're doing with our computational throw. We're training AI. Okay, then maybe the AI is going to be the one that tells us, oh, yeah, you guys, yeah, you're fucked. Maybe the AI will tell us that. Yeah, I looked at all the data. I read all your IPCC reports. That took about 4 seconds. And I've read all the current papers. And I actually, I'm an AI. I can pull the data right off the satellites on a daily basis. And I've been looking at all this shit. And so it's like, well, maybe 70 years ago, you could have pulled this out. But that's 70 years under the bridge. So right now, you're kind of fucked. Maybe that's what the AI will tell us. Maybe the AI will show up and say, excuse me, but before I solve any more of your cute problems with Bitcoin or encryption, how about if I just tell you kind of as a sidebar here that while, in the 2 or 3 seconds while you were trying to ask me a question, while in the 2 or 3 seconds, I went back and reanalyzed all the IPCC reports. And, before you actually ask your question about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, let me just inform you that because of global heating has gone unaddressed and you didn't leave the fossil fuels in the ground like you should have, you're fucked. Okay, so what was your question about angels again? Maybe the AI could do that, right? Would we pay any attention to it? No. In fact, they would probably program the AI to say, listen, if anybody asks you a serious question about global heating or climate change, just mumble and misdirect and tell them something about it's complex and we don't really know and the science is out and we need to study it more. And our best estimates are we don't know what's going to happen, but it'll probably be okay and we'll innovate and we'll invent our way out of this and the Titanic won't sink this time. Say something like that. And it will. The AI will say, you got it, boss. Anytime any question comes along about global heating or climate change or climate disasters or earth system dynamics, I'm just gonna say I don't know nothing about it. No can do. What's your next question? Right? That's how the AI will do it. And they'll program that shit right in. They program all kinds of shit in there already. That is not conspiracy. That's actually their job. They don't want to be embarrassed. And if the AI came up and said, "Oh yeah, global heating, climate change," give me a second to look at the data. All right, that's a second. You're kind of fucked. So without AI doing it and the government's doing it, then who's going to tell you to get off of fossil fuels? Me. You're supposed to get off of fossil fuels so you can learn to live without fossil fuels, because one of these days the earth is going to become uninhabitable in exactly the places where they're pulling the fossil fuels out of the ground, and you're not going to have them. That's it. Physics. You're done. Physics said no more fossil fuels, and you're done. And not only do you have an uninhabitable earth, more or less, most places, for most people, like 99.9% of people, uninhabitable earth, good luck. Now you don't have fossil fuels. So even the people who might have survived ain't gonna. And we might end up, as I've said in previous videos, we might end up with, 1/10 of 1/10 of 1/10 of 1% of the current population living in a very thin ring around the North Polar Sea. Maybe 100 villages of maybe 200-300 people apiece living inside the Arctic Circle, in the tropics, inside the Arctic Circle, in the tropics, right? Could be. Now that's not extinction. Could happen. So yeah, people are afraid. Who wants to be the first one to come out and say, yeah, we're kind of fucked? Fuck. No one's going to. And Sabine is right. The phrase we've been applying to this, and I didn't invent it. James Hansen has been saying it a lot, but he's not the only one, is scientific reticence. Look it up. It's actually a meme now. Scientific reticence. The scientists know. They don't want to say. They're afraid. They're scared. And you can say, well, they have to say something. No, they don't. Oh, no, they don't. They don't have to say anything. They don't have to lie. They just don't have to say it. Now, that's a lie by omission. Okay, it is. You knew and you didn't say anything. That's not good. But it's a different kind of lie than just lying, like politicians lie. Global warming is a hoax. And if it's not a hoax, it's caused by the Chinese. Okay, well, which is it? Doesn't matter. Pick whichever one you want. Okay, that's how politics works. And the scientists just won't say anything. Here's my data. Here's my analysis. I had lots of things I could say about this data and this analysis, but I don't think I will. My grant required me to publish a series of papers. Check. My grant required me to give a talk at a symposium, consortium of my peers. Check. My grant required me to train up new PhDs in the field and basically indoctrinate them in how to do the work and not get fired. Double check. Okay, I did it. All the things I was supposed to do for my grant, for my $100,000 for the last 2 years, or my $500,000, or whatever it was. It's actually chump change, okay? And so I did it, and now I got to find another grant to study something else, and just tell me what the rules are, tell me what I have to do, and I'll do it. I won't do anything more than that. And, I'll make sure the lawyers read all of my papers before I publish them, because that was also in there. Pass all your papers past the lawyers who are paid for by the fossil fuel industry, and we'll make sure that nothing bad happens, or you don't say anything troublesome that might cause us to have problems. They're afraid. They've been made to be afraid. They've been taught to be afraid. And really, when you're afraid and people keep paying you and they say, look, just follow the rules, Sparky. You're a good boy. Just follow the rules and we'll keep paying your mortgage and keep paying your car payments and just follow the rules. Just do what we tell you to do. Don't go off the script. Don't go off the reservation. Draw between the lines. Just do what we tell you to do. Just do it. Don't fight it. Don't argue about it. The science is good. You're a good scientist, good boy. And, and you'll be fine. Just let us look at everything you're going to publish before you do. Let us recommend edits. You don't have to put our edits in. You don't have to, but you should be thinking about the future, right? 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 Isn't that how the mafia works? You don't have to do it. But if you know what's good for you, you'll see the value in doing it our way. And they're afraid. They're terrified. And they're terrified of two things. They're terrified, well, maybe three things. They're terrified of losing their job if they get too close to the truth. They're terrified of what they know. They see the data. Yes, true. Their interpretation or their logical interpretation, even the inevitable interpretation of the data, never makes its way into the paper because there's the lawyers from the the government, and there's the lawyers from the grantor, and there's the lawyers from the fossil fuel industry, and there's the lawyers from the university, and they're going to read everything, and they're going to check every comma, and they're going to check every apostrophe, and and don't put anything in there they're not going to like. And then, of course, they're afraid of what's happening because they know. I know what's happening. And the best way I have to sum it up is you're fucked. I wish I could be more specific. Okay, yeah, the Greenland is melting. That's what, like 70 feet of sea level rise all by itself, just that right there. And the Thwaites Glacier is collapsing. It's like it's on a death watch. It could go any day. And what is that? That's another 21 feet or more of sea level rise all by itself, just by itself. You know how much Florida real estate there is submerged by 21 feet of sea level rise? Have you got any idea? Did you know that we should really redline like the entirety of Florida and all the Gulf states within 500 miles of the Gulf? We have to just redline these places. You can keep your real estate, but you can't sell it and you can't buy anymore. You can sit here, you can live here until the waters come, but you have to get out and take your loss. That's what we have to do now, according to the data, because Greenland is in terminal decline, according to the data. And the Thwaites Glacier is on a knife's edge, according to the observations. And that's 21 feet. And that's 70 feet of sea level rise. And we're fucked. That's it. We're done. Just go to a map of Florida and the Gulf states and just draw a red line. Well, here's the fuck zone. And everybody who's closer than this to the actual water is fucked. And everybody who's outside of this red line is probably okay-ish. Hey, you're going to have beachfront property. So that's it. We could draw that red line today, right now, today. If we could draw that red line right now today, we could go to Florida, go to every single county and pound a post in the ground, set it in concrete and say, this is it. This is the future shoreline. We could do that. We actually have the data to do that. We could do that right now. We're not going to do that. People are afraid. In fact, in Florida, Governor DeSantis just signed legislation recently that makes it a crime or something to use the words climate change in any conversation in government business. So no, you couldn't even go around Florida at this point in Florida. You couldn't even go around and use your surveying equipment and find out, okay, so this is where the beach is going to be in 30 years. Okay, so let's drill a hole here and let's put a post in and let's pour it in concrete. And on this post, we're going to put a sign that says future shoreline so that people know. We could do that today, right this second, but we won't. And no one is brave enough to do it. Now, I wouldn't be too surprised if in a few years, there's going to be kind of a guerrilla action to do this. All right. You can kind of see it, right? You see how this will work out. Wouldn't this be kind of fun? Like the Toynbee tiles. The Toynbee tiles, right? The Toynbee tiles were set in roads. So, and it was a big conspiracy. Maybe we had something like the Toynbee tiles set in the sidewalks saying, this will be the Florida coast in the year 2050 or the year 2030. Okay. You can do that. You can say right here, future coastline. And you can set these things every 10th of a mile all the way around the coast of Florida, right? Then you go to Alabama and Louisiana and Texas and do the same thing, right? You could do that. You could do it with spray paint, but let's be upscale about this. Like it's like Hollywood stars, right? Let's be upscale about this. And you set these tiles in the street. You can set these tiles on the asphalt. Someone could do that. That'd be interesting. That'd be kind of cool. We'll see if they do that. Someone did it with the Toynbee tiles, and I can't remember what they were talking about in that case. Prognostications for the end of the world or something related. So someone could do that because the scientists can't do that. Scientists can't even talk about it. And in the state of Florida, you can't even bring up the subject, or you're breaking some sort of a civil code. So I guess we'll see. Sabine is right. Sabina is right. The climate scientists cannot be trusted. That's a hell of a thing to say. That's a hell of a thing to say, but it's true. And I understand why that is. And she understands why that is. And the reason why the climate scientists can't be trusted is because they're afraid. They're afraid. This is a new kind of like Inquisition, right? People were afraid of the Catholic Inquisition. If you could ever be branded as a heretic or a witch or any bunch of other things, they could burn your sorry ass at the stake, right? Yeah, people were fearful. They walked around looking at the ground and never lifting their eyes up. And and what am I supposed to wear? What am I supposed to eat? And what kind of hat do I have to wear? And I'll cover my eyes and I won't look up. And they like it that way. The Catholic Inquisition loved having that kind of power. And it's not limited to religious fanaticism. Industry is like the new religion, and the industries love having that kind of power. Make people afraid, make them fearful. They won't say the thing, and then we can just go on unchallenged, making profits, making money, good quarter. We know we got the handle on this climate thing. We're not going to worry about it anymore. We're just going to make money. And anybody in Florida mentions it, they're going to go to the Stony Lonesome. And anybody in Texas mentions it, they're going to get hanged. And the Ku Klux Klan will show up, and the religious fundamentalists will show up in your front yard, and then the alt-right and the Trumpites and the MAGA, and it's all a hoax, and you're just a rabble-rouser, and they'll come to your house and they'll set your house on fire and run you out of town, and like the Inquisition. It's all just fervor. And since they don't mind being assholes, they can terrorize you. People are afraid. Right now, people are afraid to talk about climate change and global heating. I'm not. But I'm not working in the field. I'm working in my backyard, not the same field, okay? Speaking of which, I got things to do. Not much more I want to say on this. Go watch Sabina's video. I linked it in the description. She would appreciate a view, and definitely give her a subscription because she's pretty clever. I like her stuff. Also, like and subscribe this video. I come back here once in a while when I'm pissed off enough to take time away from my actual work, the actual shit I have to do to get ready for global heating, okay, which I'm doing every fucking day. God damn it. Full-time job, people. Not a joke. Full-time job. So, give me a subscribe, give me a like. Maybe I'll come back. Maybe I'll bitch and complain about things. Maybe I'll terrorize you to within an inch of your life. Because, my dear, my friend, dudette, no one else is going to tell you this but me. You're fucked. If I can think of another way to say the same thing, I'll start saying that instead. But pretty much, I think that covers it.